This is Reynolds Podcast, The Creative Mindset. Hi everyone, welcome to The Creative Mindset, a podcast about what the future holds at the intersection of creativity and technology. I'm Rei Namoto, the founding partner of IANCO, a global innovation firm based in New York and Tokyo. Today's guest, Stefan Sagmeister, is a world-renowned graphic designer and is someone I've always looked up to since my early 20s when I moved to New York City. If you haven't listened to part one of my conversation with Stefan, please have a listen. It's really worth it. In this episode, Stefan shares his lessons and tips on maintaining his motivation as a designer and as a professional. Now at 60, he's as excited about what he does as ever and is still a practicing designer and an artist working in his studio every day in Manhattan. So let's get started. Is there a moment or a piece of work where you deliberately started to put, quote unquote, more beauty in your work? Where was the moment in your professional career where you feel like you started to realize, you know what, I need to push more beauty into my work?
I think it started properly when Jessica became partner.
Okay. Jessica Walsh.
Jessica Walsh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jessica had her own sort of aesthetic ideas, particularly, I think she brought much more color into the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a realization.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if it was a particular piece, but there was a realization when we got more feedback of functionality, when we got more feedback, oh, this really worked well. And it always seemed to be the pieces that were where I felt aesthetics were at the forefront.
Jessica Walsh is another leading designer of our times, and she works in New York. And you used to be an independent designer, and in the past, you partner with Jessica Walsh to create Sagmeister and Walsh in the same studio for several years. And then now you're working separately and independently, I assume. Right. But so what you're saying is that before you started to work with her, your work was, I guess, less colorful. But then you started to work with her and, you know, her style, she uses a lot of photography in her work and very heavily art directed, conceptually driven photography work in her work. And what you thought, the work that was more aesthetically pleasing, the clients were giving the feedback, oh, you know, this worked better. Is that sort of the realization that you had?
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's exactly true. Yes, absolutely. And I couldn't pinpoint if it was Jessica's influence. My guess is that it was more where we were going together as a studio.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You know, Jessica used to be an employee of the studio, and then because she was very good, she became partner after, I think, 3 years of just working for us as a designer. Mm-hmm. And it was around that time that we really started to talk about the importance of aesthetics, which before, like in the beginning of the studio, like, you know, we had a sign in the very beginning in 1993 that said style equals fart. And I thought that, you know, stylistic questions were really beside the point. They were just hot air and non-important. And I had to completely 180-degree change my mind on it, that style just as form, just as gestalt and color and materiality and composition were actually extremely important for the functionality of a piece. And I find that to be true for graphic design, mm-hmm. but I also find that to be unbelievably true for design. I mean, look at the unbelievable success of pieces that Apple created. And probably Mr. Jobs was the only CEO ever who openly talked about the incredible importance of beauty, who also, if you ever read the biography, who basically the only real person at Apple that he truly trusted was Jonathan Ives.
Right.
And when the question came down, even though, of course, he knew marketing, he knew engineering, and he knew design, but when the question came down, he was always opting for design. And meaning, you know, look at the unbelievable success that made not only for Apple, but look at the influence it had for other companies in that, but only in that segment, strangely. Like basically now every single smartphone around the world is a copy of the iPhone because it was undeniable how superior it was over every other system.
Right.
But it's interesting that the incredible emphasis that Apple places on aesthetics, not just on the iPhone design, but of course on the interfaces and the unbelievable trouble that they go through doing so.
Right.
Like the decisions that are made that strangely still seem to be opaque to many other companies. I mean, I had a client who wanted to open stores, and he said, he doesn't want to spend a lot of money on it. He wants to do something simple like the Apple Store. completely unaware that the Apple Store is the most expensive,
right,
most thought about, most time consuming, that no other store in the world has been as well thought out and has put as much resources into as the Apple Store, where, the cost of one of those wooden tables is astronomical.
Right.
Because it is so simple.
Yeah.
But strangely, many other clients are unaware of the fact that this comes at a cost of unbelievable amounts of time, effort, and ultimately money to create something like this. I at one time actually had a chance to talk to Jonathan about some of the decisions that they made at Apple, where I remember he was at the time creating the stand for the iMac. And the company that they were dealing with in China could only make it as two pieces, which would have created a seam at the end at one part of the stand, which you wouldn't have seen from the front. You only would have seen it from the back.
The back, yeah.
And they went through the unbelievable task to find a new supplier who could make that stand out of one piece, because Jonathan didn't want to have the seam. No other company in the world would be willing to change the manufacturing process with all that means, new problems, maybe a larger price, maybe delay in the product, just because the designer doesn't want the seam in the stand. Everybody else would say, you're out of your mind, we will have the seam, shut up.
Right. The seam that nobody probably would pay attention to.
Yeah, but strangely, that ultimately, that sort of conviction, of course, is very, very much part to the unbelievable reason that people buy an iMac and they don't buy the computer that has the seam.
Right.
So ultimately, we do very, very much appreciate that sort of concentration on beauty and aesthetics, because the visual seam had zero functionality.
Right.
It had, or the non-seam. It was a pure aesthetic decision that they went to unbelievable amounts of trouble to achieve.
Right. You explore these big topics such as beauty, happiness, long-term thinking, the fact that society is over time getting better. What are you working on now?
I'm still working very, very much on the long-term thinking project. I find the whole entire process, let's say the process of creating the paintings, ultimately very enjoyable, simply because the final piece can be initiated by the form, by the idea, by the data, by the original piece of historic art, by a color combination. And it's different than working on our previous design projects. This is much more, it's almost like composing a song. Like the song can come also from a piece of lyric. It can come from a guitar riff or a rhythm.
Right.
You have these 6 or 7 or 8 strands, and you take one up and you basically weave it with another. and it's a pleasant, like, I love the process. So I definitely want to create more. But then also, let's say, if it's something else, if it's a mural, it allows me to concentrate on that same overall direction, which already puts down a lot of limitation, which I like. If I have to do, let's say, if a client comes and says, oh, we have this wall, it's this and this size, do whatever, it's very difficult to work within that space, do whatever. So the now is better direction gives me more limitations. Okay, it has to be about something. It has to be about data. It has to be about something that developed well. Well, where is the mural? Can we do something about something local that developed well? What would be a subject that's interesting to the people that walk by that mural? So it gives me some very good limitations on how to think about it. It increases the chances that mural is actually going to be interesting to the people who walk by there. And it still allows me to do all sorts of different techniques so that it's not boring for myself. So let's say we just did a mural that was made out of hundreds of thousands of little stainless steel metal discs. I had to completely explore that new material. It was a new manufacturing method with new people. We had to figure out how to put that stuff up on a wall that is permanent and is supposed to stay fresh for many, many years. It's not a temporal mural for a couple of months. It's supposed to be up there for decades. So researching that and figuring it out and finding the proper collaborators who would know much more about it than I do is an interesting process.
Right.
When I was 20, I wanted to do something brand new. Now that I'm 60, really not just scratching the surface by doing one thing and then jumping to the next. Directed into sticking with one thing for a longer time and going deeper in that subject.
I see.
And I think that's sort of a natural development.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very happy that certain artists or designers stuck with the same thing all their life.
Right.
Like, I'm super happy that James Turrell is still working with light and in some ways is basically improving the skyscape, the same exact idea. He's been doing that for 40 years. But it's slightly improved to the point where a new skyscape is just so much better than an old skyscape. And so I even now like Roy Lichtenstein, who I couldn't stand when I was 20. I thought, what a lame guy doing the same comic bullshit idea over and over and over again. And now I see that he really went deep with that one single aesthetic direction and could explore all these different fine points. And I really enjoy it. I think my by far most successful way to keep design for me as a calling rather than just as a job were my sabbaticals. For designers who've been working for some significant amount of time, I do believe that is a fantastic way to refresh, to rethink, to figure out what you really want to do. It's all of those things that I find very difficult to contemplate when things are super busy and you're occupied, your mind is occupied with hitting deadlines. I basically, every 7 years, I go for a year on a sabbatical where I pursue things that are different from the stuff that I'm pursuing professionally. And that really was the main reason why I'm still so excited about design.
When was the last sabbatical that you took?
Was already 6 years ago, and my next one is coming up next year.
Next year?
Absolutely, yes. So in October next year, I'm gonna go on sabbatical again, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can we ask where you're going? What your sabbatical plan might be?
We're looking at different possibilities now, but Buenos Aires might be a good possibility. Madrid might be one. A place in Mexico might be one. So in the last sabbatical, I did 3 different places. So I did Tokyo, Mexico City, and a tiny little village in Austria in the Alps, in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
And that worked out well. So probably do 3 places again.
Yeah. And then will you continue to do your work, or are you going to stop making things?
I will definitely explore things.
Right.
For me, the one rule for the sabbaticals is that it should be different from other sabbaticals.
I see.
So I don't really have an idea yet for the sabbatical coming up. So it could even be that I continue working on the things that I'm working on, because I've never tried that in a different place.
I see.
So I'm not quite sure yet. It's also different because in the last 5 years, I've basically not done any commercial work. Not basically, I have not done any commercial work.
Yeah.
I've done 100% the things that I wanted to do. So it's basically, so this will be the first sabbatical that I'm taking while being on sabbatical, because I'm already doing whatever I want to do. So it's new only by that already.
Well, it's a great position to be, because you've done these sabbaticals, that you've gotten to a point in your life that your work is working and taking a sabbatical almost at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say it's a good problem to have.
Yes. It's an excellent problem to have. Excellent.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a 25-year-old, somebody who wants to be a designer or wants to pursue a career in the vicinity of our industry? What advice do you have today?
Yeah, I would say take form very seriously. Like really train yourself to be able to make things that look better. That's about as simple as I can express it. And one way to train yourself is to copy. Like I think copying is a underappreciated way of learning. Of course, not to publish it, but to learn. Like, every band I've ever seen and met basically starts out by copying their heroes, In my generation, that was, you started playing Rolling Stones and Beatles songs. And I'm sure now a band starts to play different songs, but you play, but you start playing the songs of the bands, of the people that you like. And I think this is underappreciated in design, because so many of design school faculty from my generation, and they still believe that it's all about the idea and it's all about concepts. And there is not really an emphasis on form, on materiality, on gestalt, on color selection. It's still sort of like about the ideas. So if you, I don't know, let's say if you're a traditional graphic designer and you're making websites and posters and Instagram posts, select a couple of pieces that you think look really good and copy them. And see how, and by copying them, see how they are constructed. How are they composed? How is that form really made? What typefaces are used? What kind of photography? How is that achieved? Like, basically learn through copying. I can 100% guarantee you that your work will work better for your audiences, but also for you. If your portfolio is good looking, you will be much more desirable. Also because there are so few designers out there who really know how to make good looking work. And I do find, though, in general, that while there are many, many, many great possibilities of posting your work online, because, when I was in Tokyo, I found a whole group of foreign designers who was working in Tokyo because they wanted to live in Tokyo, but all of their clients were really all around the world. And the only way that they could possibly get those clients at such a young age was because of Instagram. Like, let's say when I was getting out of art school, it would have been 100% impossible for me to move to Tokyo and work for clients in the Middle East and in Austria and in South America, because there was no way that those clients could have possibly ever gotten in contact with me or could have known about my work.
Right.
So there are these real advantages. And at the same time, it can be incredibly discouraging because our connection online, while there is a connection, is so loose that it encourages people to be incredibly mean, which they wouldn't be in a person-to-person connection.
Right.
And I know this from my own experience, because sometimes I've met people who said mean things about me online. And when I talked to them in person, they were completely friendly. They were a totally different personality than what I had suspected them to be online. Because I'll give you another example. Like, I think that when you look at the people who are engaging in road rage, shouting at people, they wouldn't do this. That same person wouldn't do this if they wouldn't be protected by their car shouting at another car. If they would be next to each other, let's say at a dinner, they wouldn't behave the same way. And of course, what we're doing online, or what some of us are doing online, is sort of the extreme of road rage, because they are much more protected in their own bubble, being far away on their own computer in their own little dark room.
Right.
And they think that they can rage against other people or leave terrible comments because, well, that other person is far away and they don't really have empathy for that other person. So it's a very peculiar way of communicating. And there is specifically for very young people and young designers, a big danger in it. I have an Instagram account where I talk about where young designers send me their work and I critique it. And I try to be as helpful for the betterment to the work as I can. So I try to be not cynical and not snarky. And if a work is bad, I say so, but I also try to give tips on how to start again. And I feel, because that's the overall tone of my account, the people who comment on the work, and they always comment, tend to be, with exceptions, but tend to be positive too. Like, I feel that it's very rare that somebody really dumps on something.
Right. But I guess one way, the way you're demonstrating is just the tone of your account, as you said, because you're critiquing, but you're not criticizing in a harsh way. You have empathy towards this young designer's work. I follow your account and I see your comments all the time. And the people who make comments after you make the comment, I think, take subtle cues from the tone that you set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's definitely I definitely found that to be happening.
Excellent. That was part 2 of my conversation with Stefan Sagmeister, a world-renowned graphic designer originally from Austria and based in New York City. If you are in the field of graphic design, I'm sure you've heard of Stefan, and you may follow his Instagram account, which has over 500,000 followers. In it, he provides feedback to the work sent in by his followers, and he gives quick and succinct feedback to each piece of the work that gets submitted. Today's episode, it was a much, much deeper conversation with Stefan Sagmeister, and I hope you took away much more than few and short comments that he makes on his Instagram, and hopefully that this episode and the previous episode can become a useful collection of wisdom, tips, and lessons on not just work, but also on life. So my 3 key takeaways from Stefan today are also tips on work and life. Key takeaway number 1, it's okay to change your mind. Key takeaway number 2, beauty matters. Take form seriously. And key takeaway number 3, design your life with intent. Key takeaway number 1, it's okay to change your mind. This was an unexpected point that Stefan made. I remember when I was in my 20s and when I was looking at his work and what he did from afar, he had a statement that he made in one of the interviews. The statement was, "Style is fart." I went to visit his studio several years later, and I noticed that there was a sign on the wall, high up on the wall, that said, "Style equals fart." He says that when he was a younger designer, and particularly his generation of designers and creatives, they emphasize so much on the ideas and not so much on the beauty, the form, the aesthetics. He says now that was wrong, and in the work that he does, he cares and pays much more attention to the form, the beauty factor of the work that he does. And it was surprising and refreshing to hear such an established and renowned individual to admit that his stance in the past used to be wrong. We don't hear that a lot from famous people, and it was a good reminder for me personally that it's okay and it's natural for people to evolve thinking, and perhaps it's equally important to admit that your view in the past may have been wrong or may have been different. It's okay to evolve your thinking. So key takeaway number 1, it's okay to change your mind. Now that leads into my second point, beauty matters, take form seriously. When asked about what advice he might give to young designers today, he said with conviction, take form seriously. And again, if I had asked the same question to Stefan, say 20 years ago, he may not have said the same statement. Over time, through his 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s, he's practiced design as a profession. The work that he did in the past, which is pure graphic design, so things like posters, album covers, books, those types of graphic design pieces, the ideas were there, and I always felt that Stefan had a certain kind of aesthetics that were very unique and that were different. So when he said that he didn't care much about the aesthetics, the beauty, the form of the work that he used to do, I was surprised, but it was an important reminder that I took away from him that, you know what we as creative individuals, what we create should have at least an element or at least a quality of beauty embedded into every aspect of it. He didn't share this episode in my conversation, but I had read somewhere that many years ago, he was somewhere in Germany giving a speech, and during a break, he stepped out to smoke a cigarette, and he noticed that surrounding him was a very bare and boring scene surrounded by these buildings that were very utilitarian and didn't have a lot of beauty in it. And the reason why he noticed that was a week before that, he was in Lisbon, Portugal, and similarly, he was taking a break and he was outside of the event, the conference, which was happening in a medieval cathedral. And he had noticed the tiny elements of design that were embedded and infused, even something as little and something as simple as, say, a doorknob. A doorknob on the door of this cathedral had engraves on it, and he noticed that beauty. But a week later, when he was in Germany in this modern utilitarian set of buildings, that there was no attention paid to those details. And that's when he realized that as humans, beauty is something that captures us emotionally, and that beauty is something that can sustain over not just years, but decades and possibly centuries. So key takeaway number 2, beauty matters, take form seriously. That was a piece of advice that he gave to young designers in my conversation. But in my 40s, I think that was a good reminder to receive. And finally, key takeaway number 3, design your life with intent. Stefan is famous for taking a sabbatical, a year-long sabbatical every 7 years. It was a TED speech that he gave many years ago where he revealed that he started taking this year-long sabbatical every few years. I asked him when he started taking his sabbatical, and he said it was when he was 38. His studio was doing great and he had no shortage of clients. So it was scary and risky at the same time to stop taking on clients, which means stop taking on income. But he had managed his life so that he didn't have to work for a year, and he deliberately designed his career and his profession and his life around this 7-year cycle. So ever since then, every 7 years, he would decide to take a year off, not have to take on client work, and just pursue purely what he was interested in at the time. That's how he started pursuing more artistic and less commercial work in his field of graphic design. It turns out that 2024 is when he's taking the next sabbatical. And I asked him, well, so have you been taking on client work? To which he said that he has been taking on client work, but for the past 6 years, he's been doing the kind of work that he wants to do, and he's not having to take on client work just because he has to. So even though in the last 6 years, he has done commissioned work, it's the line between what he has done as a designer and what he does as an artist today is completely blurred. And yes, he sees himself as a designer, but the work that he does is more art than, say, commercial design. And for him, there's no difference between the two. And he's reached that state of professional bliss. And that's because he started to think about his career and life in this 7-year increment. And he designed his life with intent to be able to focus purely on what he is interested in and what he wants to do. And that was another reminder for me that, yes, I do think about my life with intent, but I can be more deliberate about planning and designing not just the next couple of years, but potentially the next couple of decades. And hopefully one day I may reach the state of professional and creative bliss that Stefan seems to have achieved. My 3 key takeaways from my conversation with Stefan today were: key takeaway number 1, it's okay to change your mind. Number 2, beauty matters, take form seriously. And number 3, design your life with intent. If you're listening to this on Spotify, there's a Q&A field, so please do send us your questions and comments. And if you like our podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. We'd be so grateful. I'm Ray Namoto, and this is The Creative Mindset. See you next time.